Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm posting the link again just through YouTube for chapter 3 and 4 because I couldn't figure out how to record myself on Google Meets, which is what I wanted to do so that if you wanted to tune in live for the reading, you could. So instead, I will just be doing chapter 3 and 4 normal through YouTube. Okay, I'm going to get started. Chapter 3 starts on page 29. And follow along on the PDF. All right, with so much going on, it was only the children, only the smallest colonists who would run around and play and wander while everyone else was working. So it was Patty and Jason who found Boulder Valley. It was by getting lost that they found it. They had walked together along the lake shore, finding little pink transparent pebbles at the water's edge and watching jellyfish. The lake had swarms of jellyfish in it, very bright green jellyfish, which bobbed around and oozed themselves into funny shapes to wriggle along. Patty and Jason walked a long way on the beach, and when they got tired, swam in the lake. Then they began to walk back to Shine, and it seemed they had been on the way back for some time, and they still couldn't see the village huts. "Let's take a shortcut," said Jason. "If we go over that hump of land there, it should get us home a shorter way." Patty followed him, but when they climbed the hump of land that jutted out from the hills toward the lake and looked over, they found they were not looking down at Shine, but down into a strange new valley. It was a scooped-out shape, gently sloping and curved. They ran down the slope into the valley. It was like standing in the bottom of a bowl, or nearly like that, except that one edge of the bowl was missing, and through the break in the rim of the hill, the lake could be seen. There were a few scrubby bushes with bright crystalline blue flowers on them and a lot of brown boulders scattered around all over the lower slopes in the valley floor. When Patty and Jason called to each other, their voices seemed very loud and clear, as though the hillside was talking back at them in their own voices. When they crossed the bowl of the new valley and climbed up to the top of its far side, they found themselves where they had expected to be before, on one of the ridges that bounded the plain of Shine in sight of home. Patty took Father and Sarah and Joe to see the valley a few days later, when the guide ruled a rest day. "A natural amphitheater," Father said. "Perhaps we should have made our village here." "Oh no, Father," said Sarah. "Think of having to shift all these rocks." "I like the rocks," said Patty. "They're fun to climb up and jump off of," and she showed them by climbing up the nearest one. "It's odd," said Joe. "I wonder why they're all rounded like that." "Glacial boulders," wondered Father. "But why all here and none on the plain?" "Well, thank goodness for that," said Joe. "Sarah's right. It would be terrible work if we had to clear them to plow." Sarah was sitting on one now, chanting to herself and listening to the sound of her voice ringing around the bowl of hillside. "I'm the king of the castle. Get down, you dirty rascal." "Can't you think of anything better to say than that?" demanded Father, and he began to say very loud and clear, "I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils." Then he stopped and shook his head. "I can't remember any more." Then Patty said, "What's a cloud, Father? What's a daffodil?" And then wished she hadn't, because it made Father look suddenly sad. "Don't you even remember clouds, Patty?" he asked, and took her hand in his for the walk home. When she could get Sarah by herself, Patty asked about the clouds. Sarah said they were big white bolsters in the sky that made it rain. But on the new planet, there weren't any things in the sky, and every night as darkness fell, a downfall of rain came close after it, very heavy and sudden, so that you fell asleep with the sound of it on the roof. And by midnight it had stopped, and the mornings dawned bright and clear with beads of moisture on every branch and leaf. "You can't have rain without clouds," Sarah said. "What comes here must be a kind of dewfall. I like it better. Rain used to spoil the days at home." The day after the trip with Father to see Boulder Valley, the landhopper finished orbiting and came back. The explorers were very impressed with the village, and they had found out a lot. They went up to the spacecraft right away to put the tapes they had made during their flight through the computer. The computer would be able to manage just this last task, then the battery cells would be used up, and there would be no more super science from the Earth to help them. When the tapes were processed, all the people met in the big hut that had been made for gatherings. The guide told us the news. We're on quite a small planet, he told us, more like the moon than the Earth. We are orbiting a bright sun, but we are orbiting much more evenly than Earth. There will be less difference between one season and another here. Such small difference as there is suggests that it is spring now and time to plant. As you know, there is seed enough for one sowing and a small reserve. The soil here seems fertile, though, as you also know, the plant life here is crystalline and might act on our digestive system like ground glass. So we can only eat what we can grow from earth seeds. It seems there is no life in the waters of this planet except algae and such like, and the jellyfish we have all seen. Tomorrow, therefore, we must catch some and see if they can be cooked and eaten, unpalatable though they look. Cries of "ugh" from the children were scolded quiet when he said this. As for the land life, of a kind which might compete with us, or threaten us, or give us animals for farming, the tapes show no sign of any such life over the greater part of the land surface. However, Peter, our expert, will tell you about this. Peter was a tall, bearded man. The children knew him because his choice of luxury had been the funny little chess set that let you play the game with another person instead of with the computer, and he had played with them sometimes on the journey. There's just a slight oddity in the record, said Peter. Signs of biorhythms, very slow ones, somewhere on the lakeshore near here. I'm baffled. There are two possibilities. One is that the computer is not operating perfectly. It is supposed to be discount biorhythms, which we produce ourselves, and so tell us about any other forms of life. Perhaps it isn't screening us out perfectly. The other possibility is that something here produces an effect like a biorhythm, though, as I say, an extraordinary slow one. The effect is only hereabouts, and it's a bit of a coincidence if it has nothing to do with our presence here. And nobody has seen anything except the jellyfish, so I think we can safely assume that there is, in fact, no animal life on this planet. We have the land to ourselves. The grown-ups were still talking in the meeting house, making plans for plowing and sowing, stockpiling timber, and sharing out food rations to last till harvest when Patty fell asleep in her chair, dreaming of eating jellyfish and being sick. Sarah picked her up and carried her across in the open under the stars and put her in her bunk in her own hut. Patty didn't eat jellyfish and wasn't sick the next day, and neither did anyone else. For as soon as the horrible gluey mass of the fish was heated up, smelling funny, within moments of it beginning to boil in the pan, it broke into flames and began to burn. It burned with a tall, bright green flame like a firework, except that it gave a clear, steady, greenish light. Malcolm became excited and began to try to work out ways of using jellyfish as fuel. He said they must be full of some kind of oil of some kind. Jason's mother, however, just took a ladle and took a scoop of the burning pan in a bowl to make a lamp in her house, and that idea seemed very easy to use. Jason's mother wanted light to sew by, sitting at her fireside after nightfall, but of course nearly everyone had something they would like to do in the evening, and so Shine was transformed, for the buildings at night were now a soft pale green, with points of emerald visible from where the lamps were hung, and the leaping glow of the flames made a ruby red glow in the middle. The blurred and magnified shadows of the people moving inside their houses cast dark figures softly over the walls of the fluted, shimmering green and red shining houses, and Shine at night looked like a scatter of blocks of fire opal lying on a dark land under the stars. So life at Shine began to settle down. After the exploration party returned, there were no more night watchmen, and everyone slept in their bunks at night. The grown-ups needed their sleep, for now the work of plowing began. There was fuel enough in the land truck to draw the plow this time. In later years, it would have to be pulled by teams of men, but we hoped that in later years the ground would be easier to turn than it was this first time. The gray grass broke and crumbled and disappeared into the black earth under the plowshare. Peter and Malcolm tried to sow the wheat by scattering it in handfuls, as Father had said had once been done on earth, before anything useful had been invented. But they soon stopped because it was lying in clumps and some was getting lost over the edge of the plowed ground, and it was so precious we wanted every single grain to grow. So we began to plant it, dropping it seed by seed. The children were better at this job than grown-ups because they had such small fingers and thumbs to take the seeds between. But it was terribly slow going, and Father didn't come to help. For 3 days, he just wasn't there when the work was being done, and people began to take notice and make remarks about him. And Jason's mother even asked the guide what the rules were about people not working, and the guide said the rules had run out as the fuel was doing, and we had to get along without any. Father was making a seed drill. He got the idea out of his book on technology, and he made it out of wood. It was a box on wheels. Father got some wheels from a trolley from the spaceship and put them on his box. It had a row of holes in it, which dribbled a little trail of wheat grains neatly into 5 furrows at a time. When the drill began to work, everyone stopped grumbling about Father and congratulated him. At supper that night, he began to talk to Joe and Sarah and Patty too, though perhaps he thought she was too young to understand him. "I plan to be the contriver, the maker for this planet," Father said. "The plan brought Peter and Malcolm to be experts and Arthur who knows about farming and so on. You know how the plan goes. But when the spacecraft runs down, it is only metal junk, useful metal junk. Peter won't have any computers to be an expert about. We want a different kind of expert, the kind who long ago helped the poor people on Earth. They needed not machines exactly, but gadgets, things you can make out of wood and string, and things you can make and mend yourself, like the seed drill. The book I brought is full of ideas like that one. I will be a maker. When the harvest is in, I am going to make a loom and a spinning jenny and find something we can spin and weave." "We aren't short of clothes and cloth, Father," said Sarah, "and I think there are 3 sewing machines. Funny ones, you have to turn them by hand." "We will be short, Sarah," Father said. "How long do clothes last? How often do you need new jeans and t-shirts at home? And you mean we won't farm, we'll make and sell stuff?" she said. "Is that fair?" "Why, no, my dear," he said. "We'll do our share of the work, and we'll share what we make as long as the others share with us. But we will be important. We will be very respectable citizens here. We will hold our heads high. You don't realize, I think, how divided and snobbish the old world was. Nobody counted for anything without a degree in math and computer science and ecology, and I was just a plain mechanic. Did you wonder why we were chosen for the escape? I'm just population fodder, no wife, and 3 healthy children with good genetic makeup, that's why. We are just muscle power in the plan, just laborers, but I reckon different. I thought in a world without machines, science wouldn't be so useful. Make, do, and mend would count for more. Humble gadgets, practical things, I'm good at those. Those will be my contribution and your contribution, and we will be as good as anyone here, I promise you." "Oh, Father," said Joe, "you're wrong. Everyone on this expedition counts for something. We are all in this together and all equal. You don't need to fuss." "Well, well," said Father, "we'll see." All right, that's the end of chapter 3. Now moving on to chapter 4. When the wheat was in the ground, a bad time began. At first, the grown-ups were pleased with themselves. Everyone had worked hard. The harrow from the spaceship had been hauled over the furrows to cover the seeds over. The land truck had been pulled across about half the acres and then run dry. So the men had pushed it out of the way and began to drag the harrow themselves in teams of 6 at a time. When it was all done, everyone was tired but triumphant. And then we all had to wait to see if it would grow, and if it would not, we would starve. The first really bad thing that went wrong was all of our rabbits dying. We had made them so hungry they had begun to eat the gray grass. One morning when we woke up, they were all sick, lying in a heap in a corner of their hutch with sad, cloudy eyes. And by the next day, they were all dead. Sarah said they died of homesickness. Father thought they might have caught some kind of virus. Most people thought they had been killed by eating the crystalline plants. The chickens were all right. They had eaten only earth-grown grain. All the children were sad about the rabbits. Jason even cried. but it was lucky about the chickens because we hoped to get some eggs to eat soon. The iron rations from Earth wouldn't last forever. And of course, once the sowing was done, there was time to think and worry. Most families dug their vegetable patches and planted lettuce and carrots and beans from the seed reserves. And what made the worry worse was that nothing would grow in the vegetable patches. Lettuce didn't come up at all, and carrots came black and hard as bones, all twisted, so everyone pinned their hopes on the beans. Beans are important food. They grew nice green leaves, though after a while the leaves had molted patches of glassy clear specks. The pods were a brownish color when they formed, and the beans themselves just didn't grow inside the pods. They were little withered specks instead of nice fat eatable seeds. Of course, it took time to find out that the vegetables wouldn't grow. Life was full of time, full of waiting. Father kept busy with his gadgets and Malcolm with testing things to see what we could eat. He didn't find anything much. There was a kind of shellfish and one or two bitter herbs, but nothing easy and nice. Every time a seed went wrong in a vegetable patch, people got gloomier. Everyone was worried, and everyone except Malcolm and Father was bored. Once you got used to it, life at Shine was deadly. No records, no television, no books, nothing. Once in the dark, you just sat by your fire, lit up bright green by jellyfish, and gloomed. Joe read nothing but Father's technology book. Even Sarah didn't want her pony book anymore. Ponies were about as relevant on Shine as the natural history of little green men would have been on Earth. That left Robinson Crusoe. The trouble was, it all seemed rather silly. He seemed to have it easy compared to us. There was plenty to eat on his island, and when he planted things, they grew, and all the time a ship might just come by and take him home. And he seemed such a stiff old bore about it all. We began to read it aloud to each other in the evenings, but we soon stopped, yet we needed something. For one thing, just sitting all evening like a zombie soon gets a bit much, and for another, all the things that were happening to us were just slopping around in our heads, and we needed some stories to cheer us up. Stories are tidy. They don't just slop around like happenings. Just once, Sarah said to Patty, "Oh, Patty, if only you..." Then she stopped herself, and it was Sarah who thought of trying to swap our two books for something someone else had brought. Straight away, she found that 3 other families had brought copies of Robinson Crusoe, and nobody at all wanted her pony story. Various people would have swapped something for Father's technology book, only he would not lend it. "That doesn't go out of my sight," he said. "Anyone may come and read it here, but here it stays. It has to be kept safe." Sarah made a list of books that were in the colony, somewhere to help her bargain. It was, Father said, some lot. He was very struck by Sarah's list. "Not one Shakespeare," he said. "Among us all, not one." There was a Grimm's Fairy Tales, though, and one of the men we hardly knew had Homer's Iliad. The problem was that the owner of Grimm didn't want to borrow Crusoe. They already had that. In the end, Father got it for us. He traded the loan of it for help in fitting out the family's house with benches and cupboards and beds. He had to work very hard for it, too. Sarah thought it wasn't fair and asked the guide, but he just said we must rely on good neighborliness for such things as lending between families. There weren't any rules about that and weren't going to be. Father worked for the Grimm because he heard Patty asking Sarah for the story of Cinderella and the 3 bears, and he realized that we had forgotten the Earth stories or muddled them up. And the sad thing was that the Grimm was disappointing when we got it. Father said it wasn't the real thing but rewritten for children, and the book hadn't been taken care of. It had coggled covers from being left out in the dewfall and some torn pages. But when Father sat down to read it to us one soft evening, as we sat outside our hut after supper, the children gathered from the nearby houses and sat down to listen with us. Father began to read The 3 Feathers, and very soon grown-ups gathered, too, and stood around listening. And as Father read on, a kind of quietness grew, a kind of strong attention from the listening everyone was doing, as though it made the words louder and stronger if more people were listening to them. After the 3 Feathers, we had the fisherman and his wife, and then, best of all, the boy who had to learn fear. But that one had missing pages, so we were stopped in the middle without knowing how it ended. You should have seen how cross that made everyone. Some of the grown-ups tried to remember the story, but none of them could. Malcolm remembered another one about a girl with very long hair and a prince, and the guide remembered one about a huge, enormous beanstalk. We all sat up very late that night when Patty crept away at last. They were all trying to remember Hamlet. Later, she half woke and heard the dewfall beginning, and the guide's voice saying to Father at the door, "The truth is, we didn't value that stuff when we had it, when we could just pick up a book any time, and now it's all dying out of mind, and we must do without, as without so many other things." And Father said, "I must have read that story once, and yet I cannot remember how it ended. But we have learned fear in our own way here, I suppose. God help us if we must do without our wheat harvest." "You are right, brother," said the guide. For in the time of fear and waiting for the wheat, the grown-ups had all begun calling each other brother and sister. The hard times were all in the mind, really. We still had stores from Earth for weeks. We weren't actually hungry, though we were on half rations, but every time a carrot blackened or a bean plant failed in someone's plot, the worry got worse. And without vegetables to grow, there wasn't work enough, so that there was time to worry. The wheat looked all right. In fact, it looked lovely, covering the plain around Shine with a marvelous bright, tender green. Little blades like swords stood up through the black ground and put a green, pale haze over the ground, and then grew thicker and stronger and stood like velvet shining in the sun. A silky look was on the green anchors. It certainly didn't look like anything that was native to the new planet. It looked like home. Oh, it made people ill with homesickness. It made them sad and tired and unhappy. Not the young children, it got the grown-ups, and the worry deepened when Bill, who was the farming expert along with Arthur, found that he could break a blade of wheat clean across, snapping it like glass between his fingers. And so fear grew with the wheat. A terrible fear that there would be no way to grow food on the new planet, and we could never go anywhere else. There was only a burnt-out spacecraft to remind us of far journeys, and of course, though nobody ever mentioned it, Earth wasn't there anymore. If the wheat failed us, there was only a box of pills that would be kinder than hunger. Probably it was because the wheat was turning to glass that Bill was so bad-tempered and horrible. He was one of the farmers, and he felt it was up to him. And day by day the wheat looked less right. It should have been milky green, solid, like leaves on earth, and it was growing brighter and transparent till the light struck through the strands of blades in the field, and they shone like emeralds and sparkled transparent and clear. There was never any wind on Shine, not a ripple across the wheat or a movement of water in the lake, and that at least was lucky, for a wind would have broken every blade of wheat clean across. It was so delicate and brittle as it grew tall. Bill was the one who had Homer. Father wanted Homer. He said it was the best book on the planet, since so many people had chosen badly and the Grimm was all torn and incomplete. And Bill wouldn't let him borrow it. Father let Bill come to our hut and read the technology book, but Bill wouldn't even let Father read his Homer without paying. And he wouldn't take any pay except food. And Father wouldn't consider paying in food. We all said we'd do without supper and not grumble if we got a good story, but Father said we were on iron rations now and it would damage our health to have less. It was Joe who helped. He understood things being older. He heard Patty and Jason and the other little kids playing counting and skipping games down on the lake shore. Patty was singing and Mary was skipping rope, and Jason and some other kids were turning it when Joe came by. There aren't any birds and there aren't any bees to share the sugar on the candy trees. 1, 2, 2, 3, a suck for you and a suck for me, Patty chanted. What's that then, sis? Said Joe. I don't remember that from Earth. Well, of course not, silly, said Patty. How could you? There aren't any candy trees on Earth, are there? What do you mean? He asked. What are candy trees? So the children stopped skipping and took him and showed him the candy trees. They were growing in the wood that the logs for building Shine had come from. They didn't look very different from the other trees, but they had little crimson droplets oozing here and there from the bark. If you put out a finger to touch the droplet, your finger stuck, and when you pulled it off and licked, it tastes sweet. Not just sweet either, but delicious. Jason showed Joe how to roll up the trickles of ooze into a lovely sticky red lump like toffee to pop in your mouth. Joe was very pleased. He ate quite a lot, and he told us not to tell anyone else for that day, and he took some wrapped in broken leaves to show Father. That evening, Father took all the sugar we had left and gave it to Bill in return for a read of his Homer. Bill gave him a 2-hour read for the sugar. Father came back and told us what he had read, but it was very boring. It was all about some gods quarreling and then about some heroes quarreling. They went to Troy, but then they argued outside the walls, and one of them wouldn't help in the battle. I suppose I didn't get as far as the good bits, said Father, though I read as fast as I could. It's a very famous story. What do we do about the candy trees? Asked Sarah. Oh, we tell the others now, said Father. It wouldn't be fair to keep it a secret longer. I played a bit of a dirty trick on Bill over the sugar, as it is. Everyone was very pleased. The grown-ups didn't just go looking for oozy patches on the trees, as the children had done. They cut little grooves in the trees' bark and fixed up empty tin cans to catch the flow. They knew how to do this straight away, for it seemed there had been candy trees on Earth, though not in the part we came from. It's like maple syrup, Malcolm said. Good stuff, and an energy food for us. Father explained to Patty that it would keep them from being very hungry till the wheat could be harvested, but it hadn't the sort of goodness they needed to keep alive and well forever. Malcolm said we should learn from this. There was sweet sap around us all this time, and the children found it for us. There may be other things, fruits or nuts or berries. We should look and keep looking around the seasons. But the forest held no more surprise picnics, just plenty of the sweet sapped trees. And it was just as well that we had pans of tree candy already, and plenty of them, because of what happened next. And we'll find out what happened next in Chapter 5 next week. We're actually going to finish up the novel next week. Chapter 5, 6, and 7 are only actually all combined about 20 pages long. So I'm going to do 3 and 4 this week, obviously, and then 5, 6, 7 next week, and then we'll be done with the novel. My goal from there is to create a choice board for you to decide what kind of final project activity you'd like to do to summarize what you've read in the novel. Okay, I hope you guys have a great week. Miss you. If you have any questions, you can email me or post in Google Classroom, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And if you're doing the worksheet provided to go with Chapter 3 and 4, make sure you turn it in to me so I can give you some feedback. All right, guys, have a good day. Bye.